Good morning. Yes, I'm Karen Carpenter. I'm a psychologist and clinical sexologist. I'm also the head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus in Jamaica. And I'm doing a case study of a trans woman who I worked with in Jamaica. And I'm hoping that we can highlight both some of the clinical issues related to the case, as well as some of the gender-related issues within psychology that we often ignore. Gender specialists often think psychology is opposed to ideas of gender and gendering, and psychologists often ignore the relevance of psychosocial issues, psychosexual issues within the gendered person. And I'm hoping to bridge that gap. I'm looking at the case as a three-stage process. First stage is the issues that Alex brings to the table, which have to do with identity and role confusion. And stage two, what happens in therapy. And of course, this is a very abbreviated version of the therapy sessions that we went through. And stage three, how do we come now to reconcile the issues that the client brings to us in therapy with their actual lives and how they will live that gendered persona in the real world? So stage one, as I said, identity versus role confusion. In psychological developmental theory, lifespan theory, Erik Erikson stands out as a person who we look to for development from birth right up to death. And Alex, when she appears in the therapy room, is clearly in the fifth stage of development, which is the formation of identity and the struggle with role confusion. How do I represent myself, both to myself and to the world? And so you will see from Alex's characteristics in a minute why this is problematic, that she should be in the fifth stage of development, because there's a discrepancy between his developmental stage and his chronological age. Okay, so here's Erikson's description of what happens in that phase of identity versus role confusion. And this occurs between 12 and 18. Usually we're trying to find out which peer group we belong to, how do we want to identify, the labels that we want to use, and there are various identity markers that we have to question at this stage. Up until now, we've listened to parents, we've listened to society, we've listened to the school and the church. But now it's time for us to begin sorting out for ourselves, what will I take into adulthood? So this stage, as I said, helps us to explore relationships. It's also the genital stage for Freud. For Freud, this is a stage where we make decisions about who I will cathect to, who I will find as a romantic partner, who I am as a sexual person. So it is not unusual that stuck in this stage, Alex would now want to have a sense of who she is and how she will engage in relationships. Alex, on paper, demographically, is an Afro-Caribbean male of 24 years, 6'2" tall, so quite a tall person, 1.88 centimeters. We use feet and inches in Jamaica. He's 200, not 2,240 pounds, but 240 pounds. That needs to be corrected, which is 108 kilos. So a large, slightly overweight young man of 24 years, dark complexion, short hair. He wears glasses and he's somewhat shy, speaks very softly. When I first meet Alex, he enters a room, but he's accompanied by his mother. And I'm confused by this because the appointment is made in the mother's name. So I was not expecting to see a young man at all. The mother and himself sit in the room and she tells me his name. And then she begins to speak. Alex doesn't speak for the first 45 minutes of the hour. And his mother begins what I can only describe as a monologue or a stream of consciousness, because she speaks uninterrupted for about 45 minutes. She describes her life. She describes her education. She's a very well-educated woman. She describes a bitter divorce between herself and his father. And he's sitting there while all of this is happening. She describes her current work. And at the end of her monologue, she introduces Alex once more. And she's made the point that she's raised him on her own. Interestingly, after I had prepared the slides, I remembered another factor. She also says during that monologue that she had wished for a girl. She had always wanted a girl. And when she heard she was having a boy, she wasn't happy about that. But here she was. She's Jamaican. Alex's father is Nigerian and a mathematician, so also very highly educated. And he's in university studying economics because he wants to please his dad. We look at the issues of identity that someone at that age, 24, in the stage where they should have passed the stage from they were 18, the stage of identity confusion, and we look at the different types of identity issues that can occur. I've put in purple the identity issue that Alex is actually experiencing, because obviously, in the interest of time, we want to ensure that we focus in on what's happening here. His identity issue right now is foreclosure. Those in identity foreclosure have made a commitment to an identity without having explored the options. Some parents may make these decisions for their children, such as studying economics, and do not grant the teen the opportunity to make choices. In other instances, teens may strongly identify with parents and others in their life and wish to follow in their footsteps. So here's Alex caught between wanting to identify very much with his dad, who's a mathematician, and at the same time having been raised primarily by his mother. A little bit of texture is added to that because Alex has also spent half of his life in the United States. So he's grown up half of his life in the United States with mom and dad, returned to Jamaica, and has a dad who is still very connected to Nigeria, and Alex himself has been to Nigeria a few times. What we find with Alex is that the incongruences that he's experiencing point to not a religious identity conflict or a political identity conflict, or even a vocational identity conflict, although he's having a conflict with doing the economics, but rather a gender identity conflict. He's very clear about his identity ethnically. He's a Jamaican Nigerian who's lived in the United States and now in Jamaica. So his gender identity is what is posing the incongruence for him. And Marcia, who followed on Erickson's work, operationalized the Ericksonian theory of lifespan development and points out to us that there are a number of issues that come together, confluences that we need to consider when we think about identity. If the person is committed to an identity, and that's present, and the person has not explored other identities, that's absent, then we end up in this box where commitment to identity is present, but there is no exploration of other identities. So here's Alex being presented by his mom as wanting to transition from male to female, having never explored any other kind of teenage sexual identity, never had a girlfriend, isn't sexually active except with himself and very occasionally, doesn't really have any other kinds of affiliations. And so we recognize that Alex is experiencing what we call identity foreclosure, having chosen the identity, fixed the identity before actually having a chance to explore. So we proceed to therapy, and Alex is in therapy with me on and off for about 18 months. And there are gaps in the therapy as well, which we'll explain. He commits to going through the process, and usually you ask the client what their goal is. You don't set the goal for the client. And he says that his goal is to get hormone therapy and sex or / gender reassignment surgery. So Alex is convinced that he wants to transition to a girl. I then asked Alex what she would like to be called, since she's convinced that she'd like to transition to a girl, and Alex chooses the name Sacha. And therefore we have the title that says Alex Sacha, because during the transition phase, she moves between both identities because she's not yet fixed in one identity. She selects her pronouns, she, her, they, and I speak to her about the process. I advise her that it's long-term, that this is a process that requires a lot of psychosexual information. We need a consultation with an endocrinologist, a plastic surgeon. We need to consider dressing and living in the other sex or gender. And we need to think about ongoing therapy throughout. Alex Sacha, I'm calling her at this point because she's transitioning, decides that in an upcoming visit to her father who works in the US, she'll come out to her dad, as well as to arrive in the US dressed in the preferred gender as a trans woman. The relationship with her father and the level of disclosure to her friends is something that we discuss because this poses a new dilemma. Alex is trying to do a sort of shock therapy to the family by simply arriving dressed as a female and telling her dad that, well, she's transitioning. We do a few more sessions and talk about disclosure and how we can mitigate the shock, how we can make this disclosure more gradual. And as clients often do, Alex comes out with another surprise because clients don't tell you everything at the beginning. And the surprise is that not only is she going to the United States, where she wants to live in the other gender, but she's also going on to Nigeria from the United States, where she will re-encounter her grandparents, grandmother in particular, and her other family members. And Sacha wants to come out in Nigeria to her cousins and her other family members. That becomes problematic because clearly, if she shocks both her dad and her family, the visit might end, in fact, in the United States. The dad might refuse to take her to Nigeria at all because he may want to avoid the kind of shame that that might mean for his family. Both Nigeria and Jamaica have cultures that do not privilege trans persons or persons with trans experience, do not privilege the LGBTQ community, and very much privilege the heterosexual, heteronormative trope. And it's difficult in conditions such as these not to cushion what they're going to find as a huge shock for them. So I've suggested a couple of things: going with a female friend to choose some neutral, gender-neutral clothing, beginning to look at things like cosmetics and the things that will give you the physical changes before we begin the hormone treatment, because the protocol for hormone treatment in Jamaica is that the person has to undergo a year to 2 years of therapy. We have to be absolutely sure that this person is experiencing gender dysphoria before we make the recommendation as psychologists and psychiatrists for the endocrinologist. And the endocrinologist will not start that work without a referral from a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Sacha becomes very impatient with me as she's going through these cosmetic changes because she's convinced she wants sex reassignment surgery. And she actually goes to the endocrinologist without me knowing. She stops therapy. I've not seen her for several weeks, and she returns very angry. She's angry at herself. She's angry at the endocrinologist. She's angry at me. She tried to get hormone treatment without a referral, and the doctor sent her back to me and said, no, they would not be willing to do that. There are options in other countries where one can go for hormone treatment without the need for psychological intervention, because being trans is not seen as a psychological illness. In our instance, the cautions are, once the person begins these hormone treatments, it can affect their kidneys, it affects their general health. They're sometimes not prepared for all the changes that are going to take place in their body. And in some instances, especially if you go for sex reassignment surgery, we're talking about irreversible processes. So we arrive at stage 3. And that rebellion that Alex experienced by going off on her own to see the endocrinologist is actually a very necessary part of adolescence. The challenge is that Alex is 24, going 25, and she's going through her psychological adolescence at 24. So that rebellion was actually quite necessary for her to begin to come back to some form of reality. Sacha, and we've now moved completely into calling her Sacha, and she calls herself as Sacha, confronts the fact that her impetuous nature and her previous choices were not necessarily the best things for her health, for her interactions with others, for her social and relational engagements, and certainly not for her future as a trans woman. When she returns to therapy and expresses that anger, she is confronting the realities of her situation. Transitioning is not something that most people can do by themselves. They need help along the way of some sort. Need not be therapy, but they certainly need people to talk to, and they need guidance. They need medical information. It takes time. Transitioning is not overnight. It's not a magic wand. There are many changes that will take place bodily and also endocrinology and in the endocrine system. And these changes are not all positive. There are side effects to the medications. There's no rush except the ones that people self-impose, because we have to be monitoring how the medication is affecting the functioning of the body, the organs. The person's moods will change dramatically, and family have to be willing to see them through these stages. We begin with Sacha by making some small cosmetic changes while she prepares to share the news with her father and friends. So she agrees to go through the hair, makeup, and unisex clothing changes. And I noticed that as Sacha is making better choices in that area, she becomes a lot calmer. In fact, she starts putting off things that she was rushing into before. She'd begun the journey of transitioning in a state of self-critical self-awareness. She was self-aware, but she was very critical about the ways in which she did not present as a female. And this is quite usual in trans persons or persons of trans experience. They're looking at the idealized goal and they're saying, but I don't look like that. I don't sound like that. I don't feel like that. No one's going to find me believable as a woman. And also some of them believe that with slight changes, they'll be believable as a woman. The term we use is passing. They want to pass as a woman. And that means that they not only want men to see them as a woman, but they want women to see them as a woman. And that takes a lot of fine-tuning. Yeah. She didn't integrate the reactions and support she would need from her family and friends. She never thought about this. And that egocentric focus of only thinking about her own dilemma is quite usual in an adolescent phase. So this is not surprising. Once we get her to look at the variables that we have to contend with, and she begins to come into her own, she starts to be able to look out again. So the job of the psychotherapist is first to help the person to look in at what it is that they're asking for, and then to look out at how that will affect their social and relational milieu. And the issue of disclosing is also very important. How are you going to disclose to family and friends that you have this new identity when they didn't know you as this identity? So on each visit, Sacha has made some other small change. And I actually remember the day Sacha came to the office and she had been away for some time. She'd come back and she'd changed her hairstyle to a more feminine hairstyle. She was wearing a tiny bit of lipstick. She had put on makeup base. She had done the makeup thing, and she was wearing very gender neutral clothing. And she was beaming. She was absolutely beaming. The week before her trip to Nigeria, she spoke with her dad on the phone. We have a saying that you should break bad news slowly. I know for the dad it's going to be a shock. And simply to arrive in the United States and say, hey, let's go to Nigeria where I will come out as a woman to the entire Nigerian family is not a great idea. So she spoke to her dad on the phone and told him she wanted to discuss some personal matters and began hinting at what she wanted to speak to him about. She was preparing him and her friends in the United States for the change. She also changed her academic program at the university, which surprised me, because after some academic counseling, she realized that she really didn't want to do economics and she was more suited to the social sciences, and that she didn't have to prove anymore that she was a good enough son to her dad. She introduced herself consistently using her pronouns at work and social events, and she was introduced to other persons of trans experience. And this, again, is one of the benefits of doing this through a therapist or some guided help, because there is a trans community and there are people who we use as guides to help you make that transition into this new self that you want to express. And they have lots of tips for you because they've been through it as well. So finally, Sacha's journey continues even today. She's still on her journey 2 years later and has given permission for her story to be told. She's still undecided about sex or gender reassignment surgery. And she's thinking of starting hormone treatment when she returned from Nigeria. She's not yet come back for the sign-off, so I assume that she's delaying that a little bit. She's taken a break from therapy because at certain points we have to stop. We have to live our lives. And she's focusing on graduating at the moment from her studies in social sciences. So I expect I will see her again as we transition into adulthood, into claiming that adult self as a 26-year-old. So what are the implications for therapists and clients and the interactions that we have with persons of trans experience? First of all, you need to know the protocols for your own territory. You really have to be very clear about what's permissible, what's allowed, what your role is, and what the limitations are through the governing bodies, through the licensure bodies in your own territory. Be clear about your motivations during the journey and seek professional debriefs for yourself. Find another professional with whom you can discuss case matters in confidence, and you can get constructive criticism as to your own emotions around this trans experience. You might be rooting for the person when they probably need to slow down, or you may be deterring them from making this transition when they're ready to move forward. And a colleague can always point out for you some good advice along the way. And we do encourage debriefs. Expect some level of foreclosure and identity formation. It is not unusual in persons of trans experience or LGBTQAI persons to have some degree of foreclosure, having shut down all the decision-making and exploration processes ahead of the time. So don't be discouraged by that. Encourage free and open expression of a range of emotions. Expect that the client will be angry at you. You are the only person that they have that interaction with. Expect that the client will want to defy you. They're supposed to, it's their own autonomy. And I would say, as a therapist, don't take it personally. This is not your journey, this is their journey. You're merely walking beside them. Be mindful of clients' sense of abandonment. It's easy for them to feel abandoned when you don't see things the way they do. And this can conflict with the urgency that they have to see some change. With Sacha, once she began to see even small changes in hairstyle and makeup and dress, she began to feel more comfortable and has put off some of the more serious decisions for a time when she feels she's ready for it. Find trans resources, find the trans community or trans individuals who can offer support. There's nothing like speaking to someone else who's been through the experience, and that's very important for the client. Remember as a therapist that coming out is a two-step process. First, we come out to ourselves, and then we come out to others. Coming out is continuous, and perhaps we need to use the word transitioning rather than coming out, because coming out sounds quite dated now. And I want to discourage that surprise effect and encourage us to do this gradually. And I thank you for your time.